Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine being 7 years old. You've just celebrated your birthday with honey cakes and your mother's gentle songs. But her eyes are red. Not from joy, but from tears she desperately tries to hide. Tomorrow, strangers will come to your door. Men with bronze armor and eyes like winter storms. They'll take you from everything you've ever known. Your family, your warm bed, your mother's embrace. They'll strip away your name, your childhood, your innocence, and in return they'll give you one singular purpose: to learn how to kill or die trying. This is the story of the Agoge, the most brutal education system the world has ever known, a machine designed to forge gods of war from the bones of children. Welcome back to our journey through ancient Sparta. The Agoge wasn't born from cruelty alone, it was born from terror. Picture ancient Greece in the 8th century BC. Sparta sits in the fertile valley of Laconia, surrounded by enemies who dream of conquest. To the north, Argos flexes its military might. To the west, Arcadia's mountain warriors raid and pillage. Every neighboring city-state eyes Sparta's rich lands with hungry ambition. But the greatest threat wasn't outside Sparta's borders. It lived within them. The Helots, an enslaved people who worked Spartan farms, built their homes, and served their masters. Conservative estimates put their numbers at 7 Helots for every Spartan citizen. Some historians believe it was closer to 10 to 1. Imagine that ratio. In a city of 8,000 Spartan citizens, perhaps 80,000 Helots lived in forced servitude. They knew the land better than their masters. They knew where the weapons were stored. They knew when the warriors were away. And they remembered freedom. In 640 BC, the Helots rose in rebellion. For 19 years, they fought a guerrilla war that nearly destroyed Sparta. Villages burned. Spartan families fled to the mountains. The very survival of their civilization hung by a thread. When the rebellion was finally crushed, Sparta's leaders faced a terrifying realization. This could happen again, and again, and again. So they designed a system to ensure it never would. A system to strip away individual desires and forge human beings into something else entirely, a living weapon made of thousands of perfectly synchronized parts. The Agoge was that weapon. To understand the Agoge, you must first understand its philosophy. It wasn't simply about creating soldiers. Any city could train men to fight. The Agoge was about creating something that had never existed before. Human beings who would choose death over dishonor, who would stand firm when all reason screamed at them to flee. The Spartan lawgiver Lycurgus understood something profound about human nature. He knew that comfort breeds weakness, that individual desires lead to divided loyalties, that a man who loves his own life above all else will always break when the pressure becomes too great. So the Agoge was designed to break every boy who entered it, to shatter their sense of self, their connection to family, their natural human instincts for self-preservation. Only then could they be rebuilt. Rebuilt as something more than human, something that would never bend, never break, never surrender. The process began before they could even walk. In most societies, the birth of a child is cause for celebration. In Sparta, it was the first examination. Within days of birth, every Spartan infant was brought before the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. These weren't gentle grandfathers cooing over a newborn. These were hardened warriors, men who had survived decades of warfare, who knew exactly what it took to survive in their world. They examined every limb, every muscle, every feature. Was the child strong? Were its limbs straight and powerful? Did it cry with the healthy lungs of a future warrior? If the answer was no, the child was taken to the apothete, the place of exposure, on the slopes of Mount Taygetus, left there to die from exposure, or perhaps, if the gods willed it, to be found by shepherds who might raise it as their own. Modern estimates suggest that perhaps 1 in 10 Spartan newborns died this way. Brothers, sisters, cousins, entire bloodlines ended before they could begin. It sounds monstrous to us today, but to the Spartans it was mercy, because they knew what awaited those who lived. Better to die quickly on a mountain than slowly in the Agoge. At 7 years old, the real education began. But first, there was the taking. Picture this scene, repeated hundreds of times each year across Sparta. A mother braiding her son's hair one last time. A father teaching his boy to throw a spear, knowing it's the last lesson he'll ever give. A child playing with wooden toys, unaware that tomorrow everything changes. The Irons came at dawn. Young men, usually around 20, who had survived the Agoge themselves. They weren't there to comfort or reassure. They were there to begin the breaking. Come, they would say. Nothing more. No explanations. No goodbyes. Some boys went willingly, excited by the prospect of becoming warriors. Others had to be dragged, screaming for their mothers. It made no difference. The Agoge accepted them all. The journey to the training grounds was deliberately harsh. No food, no water, no rest. By the time they arrived, exhaustion had already begun its work. They were stripped of their clothes, their hair cut short, their bodies washed in cold water. When they emerged, they were no longer individuals. They were raw material. The Iran who took charge of each group of boys held absolute authority. He was teacher, judge, and executioner all at once. He would shape them through pain, fear, and the gradual erosion of everything they had once been. For the mothers left behind, this was heartbreak beyond description. But Spartan ideology taught that maternal love was weakness, that affection softened men and made them unreliable in battle. So visits were rare. Letters were forbidden. Boys belonged to the state now, and the state would decide what they needed to know about love. Food in the Agoge wasn't nutrition. It was education. Every boy was given just enough to survive, never enough to feel satisfied. The daily ration consisted of barley bread, watered-down wine, and the infamous black broth, a mixture of boiled pork, blood, salt, and vinegar that even other Greeks found revolting. But hunger was the real lesson. It taught self-reliance. It forced boys to become resourceful. It made them understand that survival was their own responsibility. They were expected to steal food, not just allowed, expected. But if they were caught, they were flogged brutally. Not for stealing, but for failing, for being clumsy, for lacking the skill that a true Spartan should possess. One famous story tells of a boy who stole a fox and hid it under his cloak. When inspectors came to search the boys, the fox began clawing at his belly, tearing through skin and muscle. The boy stood perfectly still, enduring the agony until the animal literally ate him alive from within. He died rather than admit his theft, rather than show pain, rather than fail the test. This wasn't just a story told to frighten children, it was a moral lesson. In Sparta, death was preferable to dishonor. Pain was preferable to failure. The boys who survived learned to move like shadows, to think like hunters, to endure like stones. They learned that their bodies were tools to be used, not temples to be pampered. And they learned that in a world where resources were scarce, only the strong, the clever, and the ruthless would survive. In most societies, punishment is private, a shameful thing hidden away. In Sparta, it was public theater. During the festival of Artemis Orthia, the goddess of the hunt, young Spartans were brought to her altar for the diamastegosis, the ritual flogging. This wasn't quick punishment, it was endurance theater. Boys were whipped with birch rods until they collapsed, until they screamed, until they begged for mercy. Some died from the beating, others died from the shame of showing weakness. The entire city watched. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, all gathered to witness the spectacle. But they didn't watch in horror, they watched in pride. Who would stand the longest without a cry? Who would face the lash with the cold indifference of a true Spartan? Who would prove worthy of the name? The boy who endured the longest was crowned with olive wreaths. His name was sung in the streets. His family was honored. He had proven that he possessed the most precious quality a Spartan could have: contempt for suffering. But the real education wasn't in the pain. It was in the watching. Every younger boy saw what was expected of him. Every older boy remembered what he had endured. Every citizen understood what it meant to be Spartan. Pain was temporary. Honor was eternal. A day in the Agoge began before the sun touched the mountains. While other Greek children slept in warm beds, Spartan boys rose in darkness. The first hour was physical conditioning. Running through the hills around Sparta, carrying heavy packs, building the endurance that would carry them through day-long battles. By sunrise, they were practicing with weapons. Not real bronze, not yet, wooden swords, blunted spears, shields made of wicker and leather. But the movements were real. The forms were perfect. The discipline was absolute. Combat training wasn't just about individual skill. It was about unit cohesion. Every boy learned to fight as part of a phalanx, to trust the man beside him, to become one small part of a much larger machine. Academic learning was minimal. Reading and writing were taught, but only enough to understand military orders and basic communications. Mathematics was limited to what was needed for army logistics. History was the study of great battles and heroic sacrifices. Philosophy, poetry, art, these were considered dangerous luxuries. They encouraged individual thought, personal expression, emotional complexity. A warrior needed none of these things. By afternoon, the boys might be thrown into contests of strength, wrestling matches that continued until one boy was unconscious, foot races where the last to finish was denied food for the day, competitions of endurance where failure meant public shame. But perhaps the most important part of their education was learning to speak like Spartans. Spartans were famous throughout Greece for their laconic speech. Short, cutting replies that could destroy an enemy without drawing a sword. The word laconic comes from Laconia, the region where Sparta was located. But it came to mean something much more: the ability to say more with less, to make every word count like a spear thrust. Boys in the Agoge were taught to think before they spoke, to consider every word carefully. Lengthy speeches were seen as weakness, as the mark of a man who couldn't express his thoughts clearly. One famous example, when Philip II of Macedon sent a message to Sparta saying, "If I bring my army into your land, I will destroy your farms, slay your people, and raze your city." The Spartans replied with a single word: "If." This wasn't just clever wordplay, it was psychological warfare. A man who could remain calm under pressure, who could think clearly in the face of threats, who could find the perfect response in the heat of battle, that man was dangerous. The Agoge taught boys to be dangerous with their words as well as their weapons. At 18, the most promising young Spartans faced their final test. The Krypteia, the secret police, the shadow war, the darkest chapter of their education. Selected boys were given only a dagger and a cloak. They were sent into the countryside with orders to hide by day and hunt by night. Their prey, helots suspected of rebellion, of defiance, of thinking too much about freedom. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated terrorism. The helots needed to be reminded of their place, reminded that Spartan eyes were always watching, Spartan blades always ready. For the boys, it was the ultimate test. Could they kill? Could they do what was necessary for the state? Could they bury whatever remained of their human compassion? Some historians argue that the Krypteia was more limited than ancient sources suggest. Perhaps only a few dozen boys participated each year. Perhaps the killing was rare, the terror mostly psychological. But the effect was the same. The helots lived in constant fear, and the boys who participated learned that they were capable of anything the state required. Those who completed the Krypteia returned to Sparta changed. They had crossed a line that most human beings never cross. They had become something beyond ordinary morality. They had become Spartan. By their early 20s, those who survived the Agoge joined a syssitia, a dining club of about 15 men who would eat together, fight together, and die together for the rest of their lives. These weren't just meal partners. They were battle brothers, bound by oaths stronger than blood, united by shared suffering and mutual dependence. Each man contributed food and money to the group. Each man's reputation reflected on all the others. Each man's courage or cowardice in battle would be witnessed by the men who mattered most. The syssitia was where boys finally became men, where the harsh lessons of the Agoge were tempered by something resembling friendship, where the isolated individuals who had been broken and rebuilt finally found their place in the world. But even this brotherhood came with conditions. A man who showed cowardice in battle could be expelled from his syssitia. A man who lost his shield could be banned from the common meals. A man who failed his comrades faced a fate worse than death: social exile. In Sparta, you belonged to your brothers, or you belonged to no one at all. The Agoge created the most feared warriors in the ancient world. But even these iron men needed one more thing to make them complete: the fierce women of Sparta. In our next episode, we'll meet the mothers, wives, and daughters who ruled estates, bore future warriors, and sometimes ruled their men. What would you fear most in the Agoge? The hunger, the pain, the isolation? Tell us in the comments below. Like this video, subscribe for more ancient history, and prepare yourself for episode 3, The Women Who Made Sparta.